a bit around sort of vendors and the scope. How do we decide what vendors are in scope? We spoke a bit about materiality, critical importance, and having to know your business, but do you want to give us a bit more color there?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, Stephen's completely right. Like the theme, what the policy statement from PRA and then the supervisory statement is all about is, here's some helpful framework considerations, guidance for determining what is or is not in scope. And I'm going to try to offer some helpful summary of the main ones right now. But the big headline, the takeaway here is you must you must perform an assessment in which you, be they ever so humble, you have assessed the materiality and risks of all third-party arrangements and all relevant criteria, drawing from the guidance that's specifically in that supervisory statement and in chapter 5 of that supervisory statement. And it doesn't matter, to what Dan was saying before, it doesn't really so much matter anymore if it's outsourced, the whole portfolio management function is outsourced, or if it's not outsourced, but we use a third party for what we largely do insource. It's less important, right? Stephen's right, there is a proportionality. But get in your mind, you must perform and maintain in evidence this assessment against criteria, and which I'll now try to summarize at least the big pillars. You are free to attach how important are some dependencies and risks for the outsourcing that you've done, the third-party arrangements that you've had, that you have now, but you are not to get hung up on, is it outsourced or is it really not outsourced? It's more a matter of the dependencies and risk to your operations and such. So first of all, that thematic, expectation and whether or not they fall into scope, keep in evidence what you put into it. You maybe you're right and wrong, or maybe you're wrong in their eyes, but by gosh, have the evidence in hand, using what you find in specifically chapter 5 of the supervisory statement, 221. So what are you going to find in there that is the big guidance? Well, you will see that a firm is considered, the outsourcing or third-party arrangement is material, and therefore certainly in scope, where either as it says, a defect or a failure in its performance, the performance of what's under the arrangement, could materially impair the financial stability of the United Kingdom. Okay, great. That one is probably the obvious one. The ability of the entire firm to meet the threshold conditions of what it takes to be in this financial services space. Basic compliance with what are summarized as fundamental rules for being again in the financial services space. A reference out to some relevant legislation and a PRA rule book that it maintains. So compliance with basic stuff like that. And a sort of a nod to reasonableness, just safety and soundness in general. And then OCIR again, operational continuity in resilience. And it says, if applicable, resolvability. So if a risk manifests into an issue and the operational continuity takes a big wobble, why that's probably a material situation. So you're given some guidance that if you, really outsource a lot, like an entire service, again, portfolio management's a cited example. Well, no question that's material, but more gray, it's just an internal control or some key function. The message is there, the easy ones are the easy ones. There will be a gray area, and it is your problem. It is the expectation is on you to pull up all those assessment criteria and fill into the right that you have assessed and consider this arrangement outside because blah, right? You will be judged on a reasonableness. How important, how dependent are you? What are the ramifications if it all goes pear-shaped, I suppose. Once it is in scope, that would be what we would get into next. But as far as is it in scope at all, those would be the big themes.
I think that's the interesting point, Jesse, that we've seen manifest in Europe is the initial, or when you first look at this, you default to critical big outsourcers, who's your really big relationships that you spend a lot of money with. But in reality, what happened in Europe is a lot of the legal advice that the financial services companies got there was actually, Dan mentioned it before, SaaS was included, right? And SaaS players could be an important part of your business process, not a huge amount of money spent on them, but a decent amount. And also they're inside this group. And thus it goes away from the traditional segmentation of vendor management from big to a little bit smaller, to a little bit smaller, to a little bit smaller, to sort of transactional, into this kind of different way of looking at things, right? That people aren't, especially in the vendor management space, necessarily geared up for. So that was the thing we found working with the guys in Europe anyway.
We see, you get the attention if you're a great, big, expensive contract, but the supervisory statement isn't saying pay attention to the expensive ones. That's not how it's geared. So that's along the things I just said there. Yeah.
Stephen, did you want to come in at one point? Sorry.
Yeah, it's the evidence point that Jesse talked about earlier on. Yeah, I mean, that links back to SMCR. If you're exercising oversight and doing all this, got good controls but can't evidence it, then you might as well not bother. If something goes wrong and you've got a problem in front of the FCA, they'll make the assumption that you haven't. So it links back to SMCR. One of the key points that SMFs need to remember is they've got to be able to evidence that they've taken reasonable steps. And that again links into this. You've got to evidence that you have got a framework in place, and you've got to evidence you're exercising the oversight and complying with these regulations. And if you can't do that, you as an SMF are going to have a problem with the regulator.
Yeah, I mean, I was just sort of contemplating actually, and Jesse mentioned it, the big expensive contracts often get all the attention, but and in those examples, the later you leave it to engage the right people to do the deal and have a thought through way of engaging with the supply chain, whether it be a competitive process or an individual one, the worse your kind of leverage and your outcome is likely to be. The same applies in this case. If you are expecting a third party who's contributing to an important or critical service, you need to be thinking about it really early to set yourself up to be successful in those governance and oversight arrangements, because thinking about it after the event, after you've signed up on that piece of paper, it becomes infinitely more difficult to sort of reinsert or retrospectively kind of bring that third party to heel. And so I think, it's a sort of watchword in my world in procurement is, that sort of engage early is always such an important thing. And so, and just as we're talking about it, it really kind of resonated with me that all these things we're talking about and assessments you're making, we should do those really early so we understand how much energy and effort we should be putting into the establishment of that contract, let alone the management of in the future.